The first police cruiser rolled up just after sunrise. Not lights, not sirens, just the crunch of gravel under heavy tires. Slow, deliberate, like someone wanted me to notice. I was standing near the fence line, coffee still warm in my hand, watching the fog lift off the lower pasture. 10 years. 10 quiet years on this land. 10 years of sunrises just like this one. And yet, the moment I saw the cruiser nose past my cattle gate, my stomach tightened in a way it hadn't in a long time. Because this wasn't random. It never is. The officer stepped out, adjusting his belt, eyes scanning the ranch the way people do when they're trying to decide whether something belongs to them or not. Behind him, a second cruiser followed. Then a third. 3. For a welfare check. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insulting. I've owned this ranch for 10 years. Paid in full. Every acre surveyed. Every boundary marked. Every permit filed. A property valued just north of $10 million. Sitting quietly outside a town that likes to pretend it's still small while acting like it owns everyone within 50 miles. And yet here they were. Again. Sent by the HOA. The same HOA that technically has no authority over my land. The same HOA that's been trying to assert influence ever since the subdivision crept closer and closer to my western boundary. The same HOA that can't stand the fact that I don't answer to them. The officer cleared his throat. Sir, we've had a report. Of course you have. I took a slow sip of coffee, buying myself time, letting the silence stretch. That's something I learned long ago. People reveal more when you don't rush to fill the quiet. A report of what? I asked. He glanced at his clipboard. Didn't meet my eyes. Possible illegal land use. Noise violations. Unregistered structures. Behind him, one of the other officers was already peering through binoculars at my barn. My barn. Built 8 years ago. Inspected. Approved. Taxed. This wasn't about rules. This was about pressure. I set the mug down on the fence post. You're welcome to walk the property, I said evenly. Just be aware it's private land. And I don't consent to searches beyond what's legally required. That finally made him look up. There it was, the flicker of surprise. Not anger. Not aggression. Just that moment when someone realizes the person in front of them isn't who they expected. He nodded slowly. Understood. But I could already feel it. The tension humming beneath the surface. Because this wasn't really between me and the cops. They were just the delivery system. The real problem was the HOA. And this time, they weren't just testing boundaries. They were escalating. It didn't start like this. 10 years ago, when I bought the ranch, there was nothing but open land and a dying town nearby that barely noticed me. The HOA didn't exist back then. Not in any meaningful way. Just a handful of homes clustered together, organized mostly to complain about fence colors and mailbox styles. I kept to myself. Improved the land. Invested heavily. Restored the old irrigation lines. Built the barn. Repaired the access road that everyone, including HOA residents, quietly used and never paid a cent for. For years, there were no problems. Then the development started. Luxury homes. Gated streets. Landscaping meant to look rustic, without any of the inconvenience of actual ranch life. And suddenly, my land wasn't just land anymore. It was an obstacle, an eyesore, a reminder that not everything could be controlled by a board vote and a set of bylaws printed in glossy folders. That's when the letters started. Polite at first. Friendly notices. Community concerns. Then demands. Requests for compliance with HOA standards I never agreed to. Noise complaints about equipment used during daylight hours. Accusations that my cattle were lowering property values. I ignored most of it. That was mistake number 1. Because people like this don't interpret silence as confidence. They interpret it as weakness. The first time they sent the cops, it was over a fence. They claimed I'd moved it. I hadn't. Survey proved it. Deeds proved it. County records proved it. But that didn't stop them from trying again. And again. Each visit more formal. More aggressive. More paperwork. More reports. Always during inconvenient hours. Always framed as concern. always designed to make life uncomfortable. And here's the thing no one tells you. Harassment doesn't feel dramatic while it's happening. It feels small, annoying, easy to brush off. Until one morning you're standing on your own land, watching police officers inspect buildings you paid for, wondering how long before annoyance turns into something else. I caught one of the officers glancing toward the ridgeline where my house sits, custom-built, stone and timber, visible from miles away. That look wasn't professional curiosity. It was judgment. I'd seen it before, from HOA board members during informal meetings, from neighbors who thought money bought authority, from people who believe land ownership should come with an asterisk if you don't fit their image. The officer lowered his binoculars. "Sir, can you confirm the purpose of the eastern structure?" I smiled, not because I was amused, but because the question itself told me everything. "You mean the equipment shed?" I said. "The one listed in the county permits you already have?" He hesitated. That hesitation was the crack. Because someone had sent them out here expecting something illegal, something worth pushing, something worth escalating, and they hadn't found it. Yet, by mid-morning, the sun had burned through the fog, and the ranch looked exactly like it always does. Clean, orderly, alive. Cattle grazing. Wind moving through the grass. A place that works because it's allowed to. One of the officers stepped aside, radio pressed to his shoulder. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Tight jaw. Short replies. Someone on the other end wasn't happy. A few minutes later, he walked back over. "Sir," he said carefully, "we may need additional verification from the HOA." There it was. The tell. The HOA wasn't done. And neither were the cops. Not because they wanted trouble, but because they'd been dragged into something that was starting to smell wrong. I nodded. "Take all the time you need." Inside, though, something shifted. Because this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about control. About precedent. About whether a private citizen could be pressured, slowly and quietly, into submission by paperwork, uniforms, and inconvenience. I'd spent my life building things, earning things, protecting what was mine the right way. And standing there, watching the sun climb higher over my ranch, I realized something uncomfortable. They weren't going to stop on their own. And if I didn't draw a line soon, they'd keep pushing, until one day, someone crossed it for me. When the officers finally left, they were polite, almost apologetic. No citations, no violations, no action taken, just another report closed. But as the last cruiser rolled back down the drive, I noticed something that made my chest tighten again. A black SUV parked just beyond the gate. Windows tinted. Engine idling. Watching. I didn't need binoculars to know who it belonged to. The HOA president lived 3 streets over. And this time, they weren't hiding behind letters. They were watching the ranch themselves. Learning. Planning. And I had the distinct feeling that the next visit wouldn't be as friendly. The second visit didn't come with sirens either. Came with paperwork. A thick envelope, left at the gate like a warning instead of a delivery. No knock, no signature, just wait. The kind you feel before you even open it. I already knew who it was from. HOA letterhead has a way of announcing itself. Clean fonts, legal language, and just enough politeness to hide the threat underneath. I stood there for a long moment, envelope in hand, the wind pushing against my jacket, cattle shifting in the distance. 10 years on this land, and somehow it had come to this. Strangers deciding how much of my own life I was allowed to live. Inside, the letter was everything I expected. Notice of continued non-compliance. They listed things I'd already disproven. Structures I'd already permitted. Activities they had no jurisdiction over. Each paragraph cited bylaws that stopped applying half a mile before my fence line. And then the final sentence. Failure to resolve these matters may result in further enforcement action, including involvement of local authorities. They weren't subtle anymore. They were daring me. That afternoon, I drove into town. Not to argue, not to threaten, to document. County offices smell like old carpet and quiet frustration. I pulled every record I could. Deeds, surveys, permits, inspections. stacking them neatly like armor. The clerk raised an eyebrow when she saw the dates. 10 years? She asked. I nodded. She exhaled slowly. Then they don't have a leg to stand on. I almost believed her. Almost. Because legality doesn't stop harassment. It just slows it down. 2 days later, the sheriff's department called. Not a visit. A call. That alone was new. Sir, the voice said carefully, we've received multiple reports from the same source regarding your property. Same source. HOA. They weren't calling about violations anymore. They were calling about behavior, aggressive demeanor, intimidation, unsafe conditions. I laughed. Once before I could stop myself. That's funny, I said. I live alone. I don't even lock my gate. There was a pause. Then, that's what we're trying to determine. That was the moment I realized they'd changed tactics. When rules didn't work, they switched to reputation. The next week felt different. Cars slowed as they passed the ranch. People stood a little longer at the edge of the access road. A drone buzzed overhead one morning. Small, quiet, pretending not to look down. I didn't shoot it down. I didn't chase it. I let it film. Because everything they were doing now was about provocation. They wanted a reaction. They wanted proof. And if they couldn't get it organically, they'd manufacture it. The HOA meeting was open to concerned parties. I went. I didn't announce myself. I sat in the back, boots dusty, jacket worn, letting them talk as if I wasn't there. They spoke about me like I was an abstract problem. Noise disturbances. Uncooperative landowner. Potential safety risks. Then the HOA president leaned forward. We've tried to be reasonable, she said, voice smooth. But when someone refuses to integrate into the community, sometimes stronger measures are necessary. That's when I stood up. The room went quiet in a way that wasn't respectful. It was startled. I'm not part of your community, I said calmly. I never agreed to be. And my land doesn't need to integrate with anything. A few people avoided eye contact. Others stared like I'd just broken an unspoken rule. The president smiled, thin, tight. We're just trying to protect property values. I nodded. Then stopped trespassing on mine. The silence after that was heavy. Not because they were shocked. Because they were angry. 2 nights later, the lights came. Squad cars. Spotlights. Flooding the pasture like daylight. This time, there was no pretending it was routine. I walked out slowly, hands visible, heart steady. I'd done nothing wrong. But experience teaches you that innocence doesn't stop bullets. The officer in charge spoke first. Sir, we have a report of suspicious activity. From the HOA? I asked. He didn't answer. They searched the perimeter, checked structures, ran my name. Again, nothing. But the message was clear. They could show up whenever they wanted. And next time, they might bring more. When they left, I didn't go back inside. I stood there, watching the dust settle, listening to the ranch breathe again. That's when it hit me. Not as anger, but as clarity. This wasn't about stopping me. It was about wearing me down. Making life inconvenient, uncomfortable, stressful enough that I'd either comply or leave. So, that was the end game. And suddenly everything made sense. The letters, the cops, the watching. They didn't want control. They wanted the land. I went inside and opened a safe I hadn't touched in years. Not for weapons. For documents. Old ones. Agreements. Maps. Names. Because 10 years ago, when I bought this ranch, I didn't just buy land. I bought leverage. And I'd been patient long enough. If they wanted escalation, they were about to learn what it actually looked like. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Not mailed. Not delivered by courier. Hand-delivered. Folded neatly. Slipped through the ranch gate like someone had been here long enough to feel comfortable doing it themselves. That alone told me everything. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stood there for a full minute, listening to the wind roll through the grass, watching the cattle lift their heads and settle again. Animals notice tension before people do. The ranch felt alert, like it was waiting. When I finally unfolded the paper, I almost smiled. Final notice of enforcement. They were done pretending. The letter accused me of willful violations, obstruction of investigation, and failure to cooperate with community safety efforts. It cited fines that didn't apply to me, deadlines I wasn't subject to, and consequences they had no legal power to enforce. But the last paragraph was different. It said they would be requesting continuous law enforcement presence on and around my property until compliance is achieved. Continuous. That wasn't pressure anymore. That was a siege. By that afternoon, I had 3 missed calls from the sheriff's department. By evening, 2 cruisers were parked just outside my gate. They didn't enter. They didn't need to. They sat there, engines running, visible from the house, lights flashing just enough to be seen without actually helping anyone. A message. I poured a drink and watched from the porch, the glass sweating in my hand. 10 years of quiet ownership reduced to theater for people who wanted to remind me who they thought was in charge. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "Sir," the deputy said, voice tense. "We've been instructed to maintain a presence near your property." "By whom?" I asked. There was a pause. "By request of the HOA, coordinated through the city." City. That word mattered. Because HOAs don't call shots alone. They borrow authority. And someone higher up had agreed to let them. The next day, it escalated again. A city code enforcement truck rolled in behind the cruisers. Then another. Clipboards, cameras, measuring wheels. They didn't speak to me at first. They walked, measured, pointed. One of them placed a small orange marker in the dirt near my fence line. That was when I walked out. "Remove that," I said calmly. The man straightened, startled. "Sir, we're conducting. You're trespassing," I finished. "And that marker is on my land." He hesitated, looked toward the cruisers. That hesitation told me something important. They weren't confident. They were hoping. Here's the thing about harassment. It relies on the assumption that the target will eventually break. That they'll shout, threaten, make a mistake. I did none of that. I documented everything. Timestamps, badge numbers, vehicle IDs, audio recordings, drone footage of my own, legally flown, clearly marked. Because the moment you stop reacting emotionally, the whole dynamic changes. They weren't intimidating me anymore. They were building a record. And so was I. The HOA president showed up that evening. Didn't get out of her car. Just parked where she could see the house. Watching again. I waved. She didn't wave back. That's when I realized something that made my pulse slow instead of spike. She thought she was winning. People only watch like that when they think the end is near. 2 days later, the knock finally came. Not on the gate. On the door. 3 officers. 1 supervisor. Serious faces. Body cams blinking. "Sir," the supervisor said, "we need to talk." Inside, we sat at the table. The same table where I'd signed paperwork 10 years earlier. The same wood worn smooth by time and use. He laid out the situation like it was neutral. Multiple complaints. City pressure. HOA persistence. Concerns about escalation. Then he leaned back and said the line they always say. "We just want this to go away." I nodded slowly. "So do I." He looked relieved. That was his mistake. I stood, walked to the safe and brought back a folder. Not thick, thin. The kind of folder people underestimate. I slid it across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything you've been missing," I said. He opened it. Maps, agreements, recorded easements. A memorandum of understanding dated 10 years ago, signed by the county, the city, and a private development group. His eyebrows pulled together. "This says," he stopped. I didn't finish the sentence for him, because reading it himself mattered. The room changed as he turned pages, because that folder didn't just prove ownership. It proved jurisdictional boundaries. And more importantly, it proved that my land, my ranch, was explicitly excluded from HOA influence, city enforcement overlap, and any cooperative policing agreement tied to the development. Not accidentally, intentionally, as part of a deal no one currently in office remembered. Except me. "This can't be right," one of the officers said quietly. "It is," I replied. "And it's filed." The supervisor exhaled through his nose, because now he understood. The HOA hadn't just been harassing a landowner. They'd been dragging law enforcement into a violation of their own authority. And that kind of mistake doesn't end quietly. That night, the cruisers were gone. The next morning, the code enforcement trucks didn't return. By noon, the HOA president's SUV wasn't parked near my gate. Silence returned, the kind that feels heavy instead of peaceful. But I wasn't relieved, because people who push this hard don't stop when they're embarrassed. They stop when they're exposed. And the HOA hadn't realized yet what they'd done. The call came the following week. Not from the sheriff. From an attorney. Polite, measured, careful. "We'd like to discuss a resolution." I almost laughed again. But this time I didn't, because now the leverage had shifted. And they were the ones trying to make things go away. I walked out onto the porch after the call ended, watching the sun drop behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the pasture. 10 years of ownership. Weeks of pressure, and one quiet realization settling in my chest. They thought they were dealing with someone who didn't know the rules. Instead, they'd picked a fight with someone who knew exactly where the lines were drawn, and who had no intention of stepping back across them. They didn't apologize. That was the first thing I noticed. The email came from the HOA's attorney late on a Sunday night, carefully worded, polished, and completely empty of remorse. No acknowledgement of harassment. No admission of overreach. Just phrases like misunderstanding, communication breakdown, and desire to move forward amicably. That's how organizations behave when they realize they're in trouble but aren't ready to admit it publicly. I didn't respond. Not because I was unsure. Because silence was finally working in my favor. 2 days later, the town council agenda went public. Item 7B. Review of cooperative enforcement practices related to private landowners. That line alone told me everything I needed to know. Behind closed doors, someone had started asking questions. And when questions start, paper trails matter more than power. The meeting was packed. Not just HOA members, residents, reporters, and a few people I recognized from the county offices. The kind of crowd that doesn't show up unless something smells wrong. I didn't speak at first. I listened. The HOA president took the podium, voice steady but eyes tired. She spoke about safety, harmony, and community standards. About how difficult it is when certain individuals refuse to cooperate. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Then the city attorney stood. And that's when the room shifted. He didn't attack. He clarified. Jurisdiction, agreements, boundaries, signed exclusions dating back a decade. Each sentence peeled away another layer of narrative the HOA had built for years. By the time he finished, the word misunderstanding didn't work anymore. Because misunderstandings don't generate police logs. When they finally called my name, the room was silent. I walked to the microphone slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted them to sit with it. The discomfort. The realization that this wasn't about personalities anymore. "I've owned my ranch for 10 years, I said. "I've paid my taxes, followed the law, and stayed out of everyone's way." I paused. But staying quiet doesn't mean consenting to harassment. That's when I placed the binder on the table. Photos, timestamps, copies of reports, footage, not theatrics, evidence. The kind that doesn't raise your voice, it lowers everyone else's. The council recessed early. That never happens unless someone has already decided what needs to be done. By the next morning, the sheriff's department issued a statement clarifying that future calls originating from the HOA regarding my property would require independent verification before any response. Translation: stop wasting our time. 2 days after that, code enforcement updated their internal maps. My land was marked clearly. Untouchable. The HOA board didn't survive the month. The president resigned quietly. 2 others followed. Elections were scheduled early. And suddenly the letters stopped. No more envelopes at the gate. No more cruisers on the road. No more watching. A week later I got one last call. Not from an attorney. From the same supervisor who had sat at my kitchen table. "Just wanted you to know," he said. "This changed how we do things." I believed him, because systems don't like being exposed. But they do learn when they are. That evening, I walked the fence line as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the pasture. The land felt like itself again. Not quiet from fear, but from peace. 10 years of ownership, a few weeks of pressure, and a lesson that shouldn't need relearning. Authority only works when people forget where it ends. I never forgot. I poured another cup of coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sky turn orange, then purple. Somewhere nearby, people were still arguing about bylaws and rules and who gets to decide what. Out here, the answer was simple. The land doesn't care who's loud. It only remembers who stood their ground. A strange thing happens when the pressure finally disappears. You don't feel relief right away. You feel quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The unsettled kind. Like your body spent weeks bracing for impact and suddenly forgot how to stand down. The ranch was calm again, genuinely calm. No parked cars. No slowed traffic. No drones pretending not to watch. Just wind, grass, and the familiar rhythm of a place that doesn't need permission to exist. But I kept noticing things. Small things. How often I used to check the road without realizing it. How my shoulders stayed tight even when nothing was happening. How silence felt earned instead of automatic. That's the cost of harassment people don't talk about. It doesn't just inconvenience you. It trains your nervous system to expect intrusion. A month later, a new HOA board took over. Different names. Same letterhead. They sent one message. Short, careful. "We acknowledge previous boundary misunderstandings and confirm no further action will be taken regarding your property." No apology. No explanation. Just retreat. That told me everything I needed to know. Because when power apologizes, it admits guilt. When it retreats quietly, it admits defeat. Something else changed too. People in town started talking to me differently. Not louder. Not friendlier. More respectful. Clerks didn't rush me anymore. Deputies made eye contact. City staff asked before assuming. Not because I demanded it. Because the system had learned my name. And systems remember names attached to consequences. One afternoon, a man stopped at the gate. Mid-40s. Nervous posture. HOA resident. "I just wanted to say," he started, then hesitated. "What they did wasn't right." I nodded. "I know." He shifted his weight. "A lot of us knew. We just didn't think it could be stopped." That sentence stuck with me. Didn't think it could be stopped. Because that's the real weapon of organizations like HOAs. Not rules. Not fines. Resignation. Here's the truth most people never hear. Authority survives on people assuming it's permanent. The moment someone calmly proves it isn't, the illusion cracks. Not with shouting. Not with threats. With documentation. Patience. And the refusal to emotionally collapse on command. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because I didn't play the role they assigned me. Angry landowner. Difficult resident. Problem to be managed. Instead, I stayed boring. Predictable. Legally correct. That's poison to bullies with clipboards. Weeks passed. Life returned to routine. But something inside me stayed sharper. Not defensive. Aware. Because once you've seen how easily power overreaches, you don't forget it. And you don't mistake quiet for safety again. On a late evening walk, I stopped at the same fence line where the first cruiser had rolled in weeks earlier. Same gravel. Same gate. Different outcome. The land didn't look victorious. It looked indifferent. Like it always had. And that was the point. This place never needed me to fight for it emotionally. It needed me to stand my ground legally. People ask sometimes if it was worth the stress. The documentation. The meetings. The exposure. Here's my answer. If you let someone redefine what's yours once, they'll do it again. And next time, they won't ask politely. The ranch still wakes up before I do. Fog still lifts the same way. Cattle still move with the sun. The land still doesn't care about bylaws. But now, when I stand on the porch in the morning, coffee warm in my hand. There's no tightening in my chest when a car passes. Just distance, boundaries, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where the line is and having the proof to defend it.